Hi everyone. Johnny, Johnny.
Yes, Papa.
Eating sugar.
No, Papa.
Telling lies.
No, Papa.
Open your mouth.
Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha.
Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Blood Orange album, Negro Swan. This is the fourth album from songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist Devonte Hines, aka Blood Orange. This is a pretty exciting time in Dev's career after hitting some pretty personal lows in the first half of this decade. His music has only gotten more ambitious, and his influence as a songwriter and a producer can be felt in more legs of the music industry, as he can be heard writing and working with the likes of Solange Knowles and Sky Ferreira, even the fantastic Carly Rae Jepsen, and performing with the likes of Philip Glass. And he has been growing the Blood Orange name too, with albums that have shown improvements on all musical fronts, like his last full-length LP, Freetown Sound. And even though I wasn't in love with this LP, it did sound like Dev was elevating his usually airy and sensual blend of synth funk and contemporary R&B and pop, with better instrumentation, less overbearing reverb, more tangible songs, and even social commentary. And that growth continues onto this new record over here, which I think in a lot of ways feels like Freetown Sound thematically and aesthetically. But in comparison with that previous record, I think Swan is a sweeter, a bolder, a prettier record. It's more instrumentally lush and has some pretty impressive guest performances too. Hines' songwriting across this record, though, is still pretty loose. It's very vibey, which is partially what made Freetown Sound so underwhelming for me at points. It was very blissful, but didn't have a whole lot of impact or strong song structures. And even though the bulk of the material on this new album is pretty light on the ears, it is pretty euphoric, I will say that instrumentally and compositionally, there are a lot more highlights, a lot more bold, standout moments. So even if many of the songs on this record are kind of short and aren't necessarily plugged into these very well-regulated and tight pop structures, you still do have tracks on this thing like SYNTH, which features some very bright and emotive lead vocals in a sensual R&B style. Kinda sounds like a throwback to the 80s. There are also some echo-drenched sax leads on this thing too, as well as a supremely catchy and tremendous vocal finish, with lots of harmonies, a very nice refrain. There's also the over-the-top lead vocals and the gospel melodies on the track Holy Will, which in some respects I kind of read as doing too much, which is kind of a theme, a phrase that comes up on the album. But I do like the odd and stripped back instrumentals, some of the weird background vocal placement too. It feels like I'm listening to art gospel or deconstructed gospel. Also the rich grand piano chords, the gorgeous lead vocals that kick off the first leg of the song Hope. Also a stunningly beautiful moment on the album. Don't get it twisted, even though this record is pretty dreamy aesthetically for a majority of its runtime, that doesn't mean it necessarily seeks to put you to sleep, or that it's kind of hiding details in the haze and the reverb and the echo. It's certainly not. Even the song Jewelry, which is easily one of the dreamiest tracks here, has some moody rap verses, some fantastic vocal harmonies, and some jazzy sax passages that all stand out really nicely. Devonte does give listeners a lot to chew over and think about instrumentally on the album. It's a pretty engaging record, but simultaneously, it's very chill. It's very laid back. A lot of the songs on this thing kind of bleed into one another, as particular runs of tracks on this record feel almost like chapters in a book. This is something I had a bit of an issue with on Freetown Sound, but I would say what Swan does so much better than that album is that it's not like I'm listening to a mere motif of a song and then it disappears into the ether and goes away. I think a lot of the short and very fluid tracks on this album reinforce each other really well as a holistic experience. I think tracks 1 through 5 are a pretty key example of that. Just before the track 6, where transgender activist and TV host Janet Mock can be heard engaging in an interview clip where she is talking about her own definition of family. It's a beautiful moment and sentiment on the album that plays right into the next track, Charcoal Baby, thematically. A song all about wanting to feel accepted, not wanting to be the odd one out, which is a pretty key message for the entire album. Whether it be finding comfort in your own skin, or finding a place or people that allow you to be yourself, be that best version of you that you can be, and the truest version of yourself that you can be. It's a pretty empowering message, which is obviously geared directly toward people of color and members of the LGBTQ community, reminding them to be unafraid to express themselves and owe it to themselves to be themselves, which is a nice thought. There are also lots of beautiful sounds throughout this entire record, but don't go into this album assuming it's just going to be one big attempt to blow smoke up the asses of the people that Devonte intends to contact with this music. Because as pretty as a lot of the songs and instrumentation on this album are, there is a very haunting sense of isolation on this album too. There's also a pretty clear sense of fear when it comes to the current state of culture as well. I think there's some smart philosophical sloganeering on the album here and there too, like on the track Nappy Wonder, feelings never had no ethics, feelings never have been ethical. I think it's pretty safe to say that once you dive into the messaging of a lot of the lyrics on this record, it is as thoughtful as it is beautiful. However, there are some moments here where it seems to kind of fall short on those fronts, like the A$AP Rocky feature. Yeah, there's a rapped and sung A$AP Rocky feature right dab smack in the middle of the LP, which doesn't really add much to the album's sound, nor its messaging. It just seems really out of place, and it's one of the most awkward appearances of any artist on the record. Really the most awkward. No question. And still at this point, I do find some of the songs on this record to be a bit too impressionist, with a kind of weak song structure and tune. I mean, sure, the aesthetic is nice, the vibe is nice, but maybe it doesn't connect to the surrounding tracks all that tightly. I don't get that same sense of reinforcement, so as a result, some songs on this thing do just feel like these very underwhelming micro versions of songs. Like on Dagenham Dream, Holy Will, I have to give a nod to, unfortunately, and also this track toward the end of the record, Minetta Creek, which oddly enough reminded me of something Ariel Pink would do on an older record for some reason. There are a few weird performances and instrumental mixes on the album as well, but I took that as more of an interesting character trait because from what I understand, the songs on this album were all created and recorded under a variety of different circumstances, which leads to some very uniquely varied results across the album track list, and puts this album in a state that's kind of tough to describe. In one breath, Devonte Hines does a great job of making sure all of these tracks come together in a beautifully uniform and, again, holistic and blissful way. But stylistically and aesthetically, the album is really all over the place too, as it just kind of sounds like a lot of these tracks came together in a very raw and a creative fashion. Just as Hines was literally in a series of different settings for a lot of these songs, I feel like I, as a listener, am being transported to different places with a lot of the tracks here. And the fact that they link and thread and fade into one another so nicely across the track listing only adds to the excitement of the variety, because it does feel connected. It does feel, as I said before, very fluid. This is easily one of the prettiest, brightest, and enjoyable vibe albums, I guess you could say, that I've heard this year. It is gorgeous aesthetically and more compelling, in my opinion, than anything Hines has released up until this point. There are moments where I wish the songwriting was a bit more of a focus, or that there were more tracks on this record that could be pulled out of the context of the album and be enjoyed merely by themselves, kind of in a single type state, but there's still very little material that I think you can do that with on this record, because I think the experience and the enjoyability of this project comes very much down to the larger, the more macro picture than any kind of micro type focus on a single track, a single song, a single moment, because of that reinforcement, because of the way the tracks kind of build on top of each other. And again, what's so surprising and so fantastic about that is that so many of the songs on this thing, especially the moments where Hines is throwing interview clips in your face, that sort of thing, it feels kind of like a scrapbook of experiences. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully I've done what exactly this album is trying to achieve justice, because there are a lot of great things about it, and it certainly was an experience that I loved going through this year. I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, music forever.